Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ayurvedic Properties of Popular Medicinal Mushrooms. My name is Daniel Shankin, also known as Sitaram Das. I'm really glad that you're here to listen to this. This is an exploration. Haven't talked about this before. To my knowledge, there is not a lot of, really there's no Ayurvedic literature on medicinal mushrooms. They're left out altogether. And it's not because they weren't there, it's because they chose not to. And so I started to kind of piece it together on my own. And so this is an exploration. And greetings, everybody. Welcome to Ayurvedic Properties of Popular Medicinal Mushrooms. My name is Daniel Shankin, also known as Sitaram Das. I'm really happy to be able to explore this information with you. To my knowledge, there is no literature on medicinal mushrooms in the Ayurvedic canon. And that's not because they didn't know about mushrooms, it's they chose not to. And I think that's kind of a mistake, and I'm really curious. The more and more we learn about the healthful properties, the more and more I think that Ayurvedic language to describe what's going on is useful. And so I've been cobbling things together, and it's a work in progress, and it needs work and revision, but it's a start, and I think it's a good road to go down on, and hopefully it's helpful to people, useful to you, and maybe you know more about mushrooms than you do about Ayurveda already, and this gives you an introduction to Ayurveda in kind of an interesting way. It's kind of my thought about what might happen here, is that probably more people are familiar with mushrooms than Ayurveda. Ayurveda plays a big role in my both personal and professional practice, Ayurveda and yoga, both. I'm an integration coach. I'm the founder of Tam Psychedelic Integration. And, I work with people to develop tools to have insightful experiences and to turn sometimes challenging experiences into wisdom. And Ayurveda is good at that. Yoga is good at that. I'd like to thank Robin and the whole team at Mushroom City. I know it's a lot of work putting this together, and I maybe am not even the easiest person to work with, so bows. I'd also like to bow to, the people who came before me on this land. I recognize that I'm on basically occupied Mohican territory. And so, again, bows and pranams and respect to the people who came before. Bows and respect to my lineage, to my ancestors as well. Thank you for taking good care of me, raising me. And deep bows as well to the wisdom lineage, right? So my teachers of yoga and Ayurveda who offered this knowledge so freely. And in this tradition, to honor our lineage, we chant mantras. And so I hope you don't mind if I do that for a moment. I will first chant a mantra to Ganesh, the Lord of auspicious beginnings. He blesses endeavors. So may he bless this talk, both my speaking it, you're hearing it. May he bless this entire festival, Mushroom City Art Festival. And then after that, we will chant a mantra to Dhanvantari. Dhanvantari is the medical incarnation of Vishnu. He holds the ocean, the nectar of immortality in his arms, and is the reliever of all ailments and disease. So I probably need a moment to take a breath and straighten my spine. You might want to as well, just for a moment. Om Gananantva Ganapatigum Havamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamashravasramam Jeshtarajam Brahmandram Vaspata Anachinvanu Tibihi Sita Sadanam Om Vakratana Mahakaya Suryagoti Samaprabha Nirvigyam Gurumedeva Sarvakarishu Sarvada Siddhi Buddhi Shakti Sahita Om Man Mahaganapataye Namo Namaha Hari Om. Om Shankam Chakram Jalaukam Dardadam Ritagatam Chaturbish Chaturbihi Suksma Shvachati Hrijam Shukam Palivilasan Maulim Ambo Janetram Kalam Bodo Jwalangam Katitata Vilasacharu Pitam Parajam Vande Danvantarintam Nikila Ganavana Prauda Davagni Lilam. And again, may you be blessed with health and happiness. And with that, let's start the screen share. All right, I'm going to assume we're seeing a screen that says Ayurvedic properties of popular medicinal mushrooms. And this is just a little thing about Tam Psychedelic Integration, coaching for preparation and integration. We have a meditation class called Sitting for Psychonauts, which uses these principles to navigate liminal spaces. We have integration circles weekly. We have our own conference called the Psilocybin Summit. And we have a podcast called Instrumental Breakthroughs, which explores the relationship between psychedelics and creativity. So check any of that out if you like. So Ayurveda, for those of you who are not familiar, is the science of life. It's the sister science of yoga. It has the same philosophical underpinnings. The major activities of Ayurveda, right, the way that it works to cultivate health, right, that's its main, whereas yoga is working to achieve liberation, Ayurveda is finding health and balance so that you have a strong system with which to achieve enlightenment, right? Or liberation, as it were, kaivalya perhaps, or the four aims of life. So the first thing is the cultivation of sattva, or purity of being, purity of perception. So this is one of those traditions where we're trying to see clearly the nature of reality. And so sattva, you might know the term bodhisattva. Sattva allows us to perceive with purity, without obstructions of the mind, without obstructions of the heart, without obstructions in the body. And then mitigation of imbalance or accumulation, called dosha. So if you look at the bottom of this page, you'll see that there are the three main doshas, and you may have heard of these. And they are what happens when the elements in our body accumulate in an imbalanced way. So the system also is an elemental system. So it recognizes that all of reality is made up of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And these have a tendency to combine in various patterns, and that produces dosha, right? Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Talk more about that in the next slide. There's actually a website called What's Your Dosha Baby? And it tests you about various, the shape of your body and the shape of various parts of your body and the way that your mind works and the way that your emotions work. And we each have a unique constitution created by a combination of the elements. And so this will affect the way your body manifests in the material world and how your mind functions. When the elements are out of balance, we call that dosha. It literally means that which spoils. So there's not really good vata. It's like vata is a word for something that's out of balance. Right? When they're in balance, we call them prana, tejas, and ojas. And we won't get too much into that. It can be very, very interesting to find the right balance for you. Some people are naturally tend more towards vata. Some people tend naturally more towards pitta. What is good for you is individual. It's not necessarily good for other people. But what we're going to see is that certain mushrooms reduce vata, reduce pitta, reduce kapha, and therefore create more balance in the system and therefore create health. So what we're doing here today is actually developing an Ayurvedic vocabulary I have no doubt that there's probably people watching who know a lot about the healing properties of mushrooms and might know more about the healing properties of mushrooms than I do. So what I want to explore is, how do we describe these in Ayurvedic terms, right? And how might we work this into an Ayurvedic regimen or a lifestyle practice that we may already have? Excuse me. So that's what I'm interested in exploring. So when we say that certain mushrooms reduce inflammation in Ayurvedic terms, it's mitigating pitta, right? When it's purifying the blood, it's purifying rasa dhatu, right? So on the right-hand side of this page, you'll see the 7 tissues of the body, rasa, rakta, mamsa, meda, ashti, maja, shukra. And so that's blood, that's plasma, blood, muscle, tissue, bone, nerve, and reproductive tissue. And so the idea is that these feed each other, that they sort of alchemize in some sort of mystical way, that when rasa is very healthy, it nourishes rakta. And if rakta is very healthy, it nourishes mamsa. And so there's this sort of like subtle metabolism that is going on. And when we get very healthy reproductive tissue, we end up with something called ojas, and ojas is like contented immunity. It's the thing about us that makes us strong and healthy and happy and contented and sort of cozy. And so the idea is to kind of nourish these tissues so that they can then in turn nourish the deeper tissues, so that that can in turn nourish our immunity and our deeper health. There's also various metabolism processes that produce various waste products, and it's beyond the scope of this. So that's when we say dhatus, that's what we're talking about, right? Losing weight, reducing fat is mada dhatu. Circulation is a particular kind of pranic energy, right? A circulating energy, prana, you probably know, means energy. Increased memory is tarpika kapha, right? So this is built on something called Samkhya philosophy, right? So it's a consciousness first model, right? So it says that there was consciousness, and then that steps down, creates an ego, creates elements, and then we show up, right? Somewhere very, very down towards the bottom. But what I want to call your attention to are those 3 things, sattva, rajas, and tamas. One looks like a flame, one looks like an atom, and one is a black circle, right? And so these are things that I want us to be very, very interested in, because it's important to understand why mushrooms don't show up in any Ayurvedic literature up until now, right? And so sattva, right, is the quality of being introverted, contemplative, selfless, meditative, virtuous, clean, pure, clear, and noble. Rajas is the quality of being extroverted, powerful, having desires, being self-motivated, selfish perhaps, being interested in the material world, name, fame, ambitious, sometimes greedy, sometimes arrogant. And tamas is considered to be unconscious, pure, impure, lethargic, destructive, wicked, inert, harmful, deluded, and spoiled. All of these are important, right? And it's the interplay of these 3 that create the world. Without tamas, there would be no material world. There would be no wood to knock on. You would not have a physical body. You would never be able to go to sleep, right? Tamas is sleep, right? If there wasn't rajas, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, right? And if there was not sattva, you wouldn't be conscious. So these little images, this little grid off to the side, is something that I use for my class on Ayurvedic set and setting, right? For putting together a psychedelic set and setting, and how to kind of create an environment for yourself that promotes sort of high thinking, peacefulness, and the like. So it's not unlike creating a temple for yourself, right? A temple atmosphere and a temple attitude. So the 10 things, the 10 ways to promote sattva that are listed in the Bhagavata Purana in the 11th canto are scripture, water and food, pure water, right? Pure food, good company, a good meditative, clean place, a nice time, auspicious time, doing good action, right? Initiations, right? So that's actually like setting an intention and starting right. Having a good meditation practice, perhaps a good mantra practice, and being purified in some way. Having purified. We don't have time to really go into that too much, but it's here and it's useful, just so you know. And so it sort of brings us to the idea again of like, why aren't mushrooms talked about in Ayurveda, right? Mushrooms are considered tamasic. Why are mushrooms considered tamasic? And usually people brush you off and they say, well, they grow on shit in the dark, right? And that's tamasic. Growing on feces, tamasic, no sunlight, no brightness, kind of sun represents consciousness, right? Represents wisdom. They're growing in the dark. They don't do photosynthesis. This little image down here, my mother actually had on her desk at work for a while. And I thought it was funny that it popped up when you search for that. So, of course, you're probably going to say, well, not all mushrooms grow on shit, right? Not all mushrooms are dung-loving, right? Not all mushrooms are coprophilous. Some are simply saprophytic, which means they grow on dead things and they cause decay, and this is not better, right? Here we see some chicken of the woods just kind of slowly decaying this tree, right? And so this idea, they release these enzymes and they break down wood, and so they create decay, and that's still tamasic. The idea of decay and breaking down is still a tamasic concept. It makes me wonder does growing mushrooms on inoculated grain, is that less tamasic? Probably to some degree. It's possible that it's also conservatism, right? That the Ayurvedic physicians were not much different than perhaps some of the doctors of today who are very cautious about using mushrooms and psychedelic mushrooms. We see things like Michael Pollan's article that came out not so fast on decriminalizing mushrooms, right? So that kind of cautiousness is possible. Perhaps it's also a claim at philosophical or religious supremacy, right? That other religious dogmas or philosophies are not as pure, and that their methods are more sattvic, more peaceful and sweet than these others. Because I have no doubt that they knew mushrooms existed. Right? There's no way in the three worlds that they didn't know mushrooms existed, and there's no way in the three worlds they didn't know what they did. Right? If we look there on the right, there's Lord Shiva, and this is actually an image of him making bhang, right? So he's making a cannabis mixture. But there's also images of Shiva holding mushrooms. A lot of them are rock carvings, and so they're not quite as stunning. I picked wanted a stunning image. And then Mike Crowley, in his book, The Secret Drugs of Buddhism, talks a lot about how the Buddhists were using mushrooms quite a bit. And so this idea of perhaps wanting to set themselves apart as the clean and the pure ones, while these other crazy yogis were doing their crazy yogi stuff. So that's a possibility. So sometimes, as we know, death and decay are actually very healthful. Yes? Without decay, the forest would be a huge pile of dead logs, and it'd be a mess. And then in the human body, if you can manage to kill cancer cells, like that's pretty great too, right? And so there's a lot of mushrooms where they have done fairly rigorous studies and have found that they not only inhibit the proliferation of cancer cells, right? So if we look at these two species of reishi mushrooms, the hemlock and the lingzi, that they not only inhibit the proliferation of certain cancer cells, but they also sometimes induce apoptosis or cell death. They seemingly, they secrete enzymes that, in nature, they secrete enzymes that break down the cells, and it would seem that it's not too dissimilar, that they encourage cancer cells to die, which is nice. And leukemia, breast cancer, colorectal, and liver are just some of those. So while we're on the topic of reishi, we'll talk about some of the other benefits of reishi mushrooms, and we'll just swap in our Ayurvedic terms, right? So you get to sort of know the Ayurvedic language. So fighting disease, vyadi shamatva, right? This is the immune, right? This is the immune quality in Ayurveda, right? And so we nourish the tissues, the dhatus that we talked about, and then that builds strength and contentment, ojas, right? So reishi mushrooms builds ojas, gives us more of an ability to fight disease, right, through the nourishment of the tissues. It's also very healthy for the heart, sadhika pitta, and the circulation, vyana prana, right? And so there's various, we were talking about pitta, there are things called subdoshas, and that these rule different parts of the body. And pitta kind of often governs things like heat, right? Heat, intelligence, fire, things like the blood, anything that is sort of like hot, inflammatory things, transformation, anything that you would associate with fire. And so the heart and circulation falls under that category. We have this thing called sadhika pitta. And sadhika pitta, when it balances the heart, we also have this idea of purifying the spiritual heart and the emotions as well, right? So it's things like desire and balanced desire, and ambition and balanced ambition, and wanting the best, right? Sort of, again, purifying our desires to move towards sattvic things, which would be kind of selfless, higher ideals. And then there's this idea of circulation. Prana is movement, right? Vata is movement. And so we have prana is this idea of nervous system energy and circulation. Anywhere that there's anything that moves, like nervous system information, right, is vata or prana. And so the circulatory energy, the circulatory movement is called vyana prana. And that expresses kind of joy and elation and excitement and happiness, right? Sort of almost a festive attitude. At the same time, it calms down restlessness and anxiety. Vata exhaustion happens when we're too restless for too long. We're anxious and we run around like a chicken with our head cut off, and we wear ourselves out and we get exhausted, right? That's a vata issue. It's not to be confused with kapha exhaustion, which is just sort of actually would benefit from somebody getting you up and running you around. If it's sort of that kind of depression, that sort of the depressed lethargy, where you just kind of don't feel like it, where there's just no joy. And it's not due to exhaustion so much as just unhappiness, deep unhappiness, not getting what one wants, not feeling loved. Vata can also, increased vata can also be lead to sleep disorders and insomnia, right? So reishi seems to be very, very grounding for vata. Shiitakes, right? The properties of shiitake mushrooms. And what we're doing here is we're going to focus mostly on their digestive properties, right? They're really healthy for all things digestive. And so when we think about digestion, we think about Agni, right? And Agni means digestive fire. And there's Agni in the belly. There's Agni in the mind, right? That helps to digest ideas. creates intelligence and insight and wisdom. Sometimes when people are, not to get too off topic, but having strong Agni is good for psychedelic integration. If you have a lot of visions and hallucinations and ideas and thoughts that are all very, very confusing, being able to have a strong Agni will help you turn hallucination into wisdom and insight, which is cool, right? That's what we want. We're going for insight in those cases, if that's one of our things. So shiitakes are really healthy for all things digestive. They cleanse the tracts of the digestive tract and the eliminative tract, right? And in Sanskrit, those are called the shrotas, right? The shrotas are the various channels of the body that things travel through. And the anavaha shrota, right, is the digestive tract. And ana means food. You might have heard of the goddess Annapurna. There's I don't know if it's still there. I don't believe it is, but there was a cool head shop on Haight Street many years ago called Annapurna, and it's the goddess of food and abundance. There's also a mountain in Nepal called the Annapurna. People go and hike the Annapurna circuit. And then there's the Purushava, and that is the eliminative tract, right? So shiitakes kind of clean those out and keep that healthy. They can also lower cholesterol and help you manage a healthy weight, right? And so cholesterol and weight is a kapha issue, right? So kapha's elements are earth and water. And so when you think about being earthy and watery, right, there can be swelling, or it can be hard to lose weight, easy to gain weight. Probably the most famous kapha in the world is Oprah. And we've kind of watched her. This is not to say anything negative about Oprah. This is just a observation that she's kind of has a kapha body type. And she has a kapha disposition too. She's very kind of sweet and giving. She has that kind of contentment, that ojas kind of energy. And you know, she's always gifting people, and she's got a very, did I say motherly already? Motherly energy in a lot of ways. And we've seen her struggle with weight. It goes up and down, it goes up and down. All right. And so shiitake can help to pacify kapha dosha, help to lessen that. And cholesterol, right, is an accumulation inside the blood vessels, right? And so anytime there's accumulation or buildup, that's a kapha issue, right? Whereas inflammation would be a pitta issue, and nervous issues are vata issues, right? And so it also, helps to balance medas dhatu, fat tissue. Shiitake improves the leptin levels in our body through various other chemical means, right? And the leptin levels are the satiation hormones, right? And so we know that when we feel satiated, that we stop eating, right? And so that's a hormonal thing. And so if we feel satiated sooner, we eat less, right? If we eat less, our digestive system functions better. And so this helps support samana prana, which is the subdosha of vata, right? So that's sort of the mobile quality of almost the enzymatic digestive quality that requires a certain amount of air in your guts to function properly, right? And that blurbling and that moving around and that sort of thing, it helps get things going the way they need to be. And then panchaka pitta is the kind of fiery quality of the belly that's required, that cooks and heats the food, and then the overall digestion, which is agni, which sort of rules all of that. Digestion is very important in Ayurveda, right? So so digestion kind of gets its own thing, and like Agni is almost revered as a god, right? There's Agni mantras, there's Agni hotras, there's worship ceremonies just of of Agni. This brings us to Maitaki, right? The properties of Maitaki mushrooms. They strengthen the bones, right? Ashti Dhatu, right? It gives you strong bones. It helps prevent osteomalacia, right? Which is the softening of the bones. So that's pretty cool. So it kind of strengthens our structure in a healthy way, right? Which is pretty great. It also supports the production of T cells, which suggests that it nourishes the Maja Dhatu, which is both the nervous tissue and also covers the bone marrow, right? Because the precursor cells to T cells are produced in the bone marrow, and then it goes to the thymus, and then the thymus turns some of those precursor cells into T cells, right? Which then supports our immunity, right? So we see, if we look at our chart about immunity, right? It's like Maja, I don't know if you can see my mouse, Maja Dhatu nourishes Shukra, reproductive, and then from there we go to Ojas, we go to like deep, deep, strong immunity, right? So we're getting kind of deep from Ashti, which is bone, right, to Maja, which is nervous system and bone marrow. Then that nourishes Shukra, right? So Maitaki is probably good for reproduction as well, right? That's probably a good next study, right? Because they're sort of close in the circle, right? Whereas Shiitake is kind of closer to, it's down here at Meda, right? So the production of T cells improves immunity, right? Ojas, we said that. This should have a bullet point, right? But there's no bullet there. Fight cellular breakdown due to oxidative stress and oxidative damage. So that's all Vata, right? Oxidative stress and oxidative damage, that kind of breakdown due to oxidation is a Vata kind of stress thing. It's going to be pacified by reducing stress in the system, and by eating, clean foods, fresh foods, fresh vegetables, nourishing the self, keeping yourself calm and easy actually translates into ease on a cellular level, right? And so this breakdown, we talked about breakdown being tamasic, right? And this tamasic breakdown is due to stress and nervous system issues, right? And then one of the other interesting things about Maitaki is that it balances the blood sugar, right? So it reduces kapha and purifies the blood tissue and all. This is very, very healthful. And it's really interesting to me how these mushrooms are seemingly like a little bit all over the place, right? They just sort of evolved or built us. They evolved us in such a way where they just do certain things that are sort of in the same area, but then they're just like throw in a curveball from time to time. This brings us to lion's mane. And lion's mane we all love because we have heard that it works really well for neurogenesis, that it's very good for the brain. It pairs well with a lot of other mushrooms, right? It pairs well with psilocybin, and even in small doses and micro doses creates remarkable health for mental health and neurological health. One of the ways that it does this is by regenerating the myelin sheaths on the nerves. And so the myelin sheaths are sort of these fatty protective layers on the nervous system that enables the electric energy to move through, right? And so that seemingly electric energy, that charge that runs through the nervous system energy, is prana, right? Prana governs the nervous system. And so it's helpful for prana in general. Meta Dhatu, we talked about. Meta Dhatu is fat tissue, right? So it nourishes the fat tissue. And then it also supports the Maja Dhatu, right, which is the nervous system energy. So we have it working on 2 different tissues and working on prana itself. It also supports the cognitive functioning of Tejas, Pitta and Tejas, right? We talked about how that when Pitta is balanced, when fire and water are balanced, we call that Tejas, right? And that is the ability to have a balanced heating system in the body, right? Your skin is warm and, it's the right color, right? As far as like ruddiness, it not right for you, right? We're talking for your constitution, that you wouldn't be too pale or you wouldn't be too, red. And you ever meet somebody when they drink too much, they just flush red, right? It's a pitta thing. So balanced digestion, right? And those sorts of things, right? And so Sattva pitta is the heart, mind pitta. And so when that works, right, that's what we call cognitive functioning. And then Udana prana, right? Prana is the air and ether element. And so when there's proper movement of air in the mind, also that supports us, our cognitive function, our thinking clearly, our inspiration, right? When we think about mental qualities that relate to air and space, it's inspiration, open-mindedness, right? The ability to make associations appropriately, right? To move from area of interest to area of interest, from concept to concept. So amyloid plaques are these buildups in the brain that seemingly relate to Alzheimer's, that seemingly cause Alzheimer's. I was reading Ayurvedic literature on this. They say that these are built because of high vata, right? So it's like we're sort of building things that are not quite right. There's also sort of sometimes twists and turns in the nervous system that shouldn't be there. And also by purifying the manavaha shrota, right? Manavaha shrota being the channel of the mind, right? And so when that's blocked, right, plaques form, right? The energy can't get through the way it's supposed to, and buildups occur, sort of like a bottleneck or, traffic jam in the mind. And so lion's mane mushroom seems to reduce these, which would lead us to believe that it is purifying the manavaha shrota. Manas means mind. And then it supports the parasympathetic nervous system. Right? It allows us to be cool and calm. It reduces pitta, it reduces inflammation, and helps us to build ojas because and it supports the parasympathetic nervous system as well, right? The part of us that is calm and cool, part of us that digests and rests and is able to take the time to think about things, consider things, to meditate, to contemplate, right? It's cooling to the system, it's cooling to the mind. It reduces pitta. And by doing all of these things, it helps to build ojas, right? Calmness leads to ojas. And so that is pretty much the time that we have. I just want to throw in a Ayurvedic lifestyle tip, right? Just in case you want to think about an Ayurvedic lifestyle, that in a lot of ways it starts with dinacharya, which is a healthy, consistent routine, often in the morning, going to sleep and waking up at the same time every day, having a gratitude practice, going to the bathroom and evacuating your bowels early. If you can't, that should tell you something about your shrotas and about your agni, right? Like if you are not going to the bathroom pretty early in the morning, your shortas are clogged and your agni is probably low and toxins are accumulating in your system. Right? So it's something to be aware of. Right? Shiitake would probably help with that. Right? Clean the body with a tongue scraper and a shower, warm water with lemon, self-massage with oil, like warm medicated oil or Ayurvedically sound oil is also very good for combating things like oxidative stress in general. Having a little bit of a yoga practice, sun salutation practice, having a breathing practice, having a meditation practice, and seeing how much of that you can get done before breakfast, even. And so this, it only gets more involved from here. You do what you can. I'm not trying to lay a heavy trip on anybody, but that's just sort of just the thoughts. It's simple and doesn't have to be complex, but it can get that way, right? It can get very sophisticated. You can go in very, very deep. It's a little bit like a fractal. And then again, that's just my info. Shoot me an email through the website. Reach out, tell me how it's going. And again, thank you to all of you. May you be blessed. May you be healthy. Big thank you to Robin. Appreciate all the work that you've done and all of your team. And yeah, be well, everybody. Thanks so much.
All right. What an amazing talk, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
We've got Daniel here with us live for the live Q&A session. So glad you're still here sticking around to meet Daniel Shankin. So I am so impressed. I keep learning so much about mushrooms, and I just keep wondering, like, why don't we all practice eating mushrooms, foraging mushrooms, making medicine? Why isn't this like common practice for our lives?
Right. Well, I mean, it's really interesting that, this culture has had a taboo around mushrooms for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that they're considered inauspicious. They're kind of considered dirty. And I mean, we know that like a lot of different sort of religions and philosophies have taboos around different kinds of food, right? There's kosher rules and there's halal rules. And, Ayurveda, which came out of, the Indus Valley, shares common philosophical antecedents with Hinduism and yoga and things like that. Things like onions, garlic, meat, and mushrooms are considered to be impure in various ways. And I mean, it sort of makes sense in some ways. It's an attempt to keep one's peoples healthy in some ways, but it seems like in this case it was a gross oversimplification to sort of write off an entire branch of medicine because it's tricky. It's tricky to pick the right one sometimes.
True. And I think I can confidently identify, I'd say 6.
Okay, cool.
And I know there's like thousands upon thousands. And I just learned last night that there are mushrooms that are seasonally, or they come through every couple of years, or because of deforestation, we're not even getting to meet some species because we've destroyed their habitat of where they are. So, yeah.
So it reminds me of, I was looking at Paul Stamets' book, Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World. Mm-hmm. And it's an identification guide. And one of the chapters is called The Deadly Lookalikes.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, that's a chapter you want to study really closely.
Yeah, right? Don't
because
die.
you just because it's like, just don't eat those.
Right.
Okay. It reminds me of that movie Into the Wild, that book.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as you said that, that's how the guy died. He falsely identified something, or he was on the wrong page, and he falsely identified something, and then he starved to death.
right? Yeah, it killed him.
Killed him.
And so, but the thing is, we've come to a period in our history where identification is possible. There are not only in our local communities, but there are identification forums worldwide where you can share what you foraged and people can tell you if it's healthy or not. And there's also, it's so easy to grow at home.
Yes.
So it's like if you grow, lion's mane, or you have, in your garage, or you have shiitake logs in your backyard, it's like you can be pretty assured that you're going to get what you're going to get. And the health benefits are immeasurable.
Right.
Well, actually, the thing is that they are actually measurable.
But
right?
There's an infinite amount. Yeah.
Yes. So I had a question for you on the health benefits.
Mm-hmm.
You had really great information about so many different benefits attributed to each one of these mushrooms. And especially as we're thinking about different cultures and different areas of the world, what do you feel is attributable to the cooking practices of that mushroom in preserving those medicinal properties that we're looking for? Like, do we need to be careful about methods that we're cooking if we're going for a specific effect of a specific mushroom?
Oh, I don't know.
That's a good question.
I think it's my sense that, so really we don't want to eat mushrooms raw. They tend to be hard to digest raw. So I guess what we're thinking about is maybe extractive properties, because we're going to cook our mushrooms and then we're going to, hope that they give us the benefit that we get. But when we start to look at, are we really trying to cure or fix something by or prevent something by just like macro dosing huge amounts of shiitake, for example, or are we sort of creating a healthy lifestyle? Whereas if you are really trying to get serious benefit out of something, you might want to have, an extraction, you might like a lion's mane. This is not an advertisement. It's just what happens to be here, where, there is an extraction process that's been designed to keep the healthful properties.
Right.
So, I'm a big believer in, make your food be medicine and medicine your food.
Absolutely.
And so just the idea of introducing healthful things into a diet that is something happening on the screen?
I have a fly, and at any moment it's going to crawl onto my camera. Sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to distract you.
What I'm hoping, that the Ayurvedic sort of methodology is about eating seasonal foods, right? And preparing them in such a way that they're nourishing to your digestive system, easy to digest and easy to absorb, and making that a lifestyle practice. There is the fly.
This is proof we're live.
So, if I am, for example, I recently heard Paul speak about, neurogenesis and keeping your brain healthy and your mind healthy. And so, I'm going to sort of, start to double down on lion's mane mycelium, right, for example. And I expect that that's going to do more than me putting locally grown lion's mane into my omelets. Right? But absolutely. I still feel like I want to eat like locally grown foods.
Right.
Locally grown foods in season, prepared and spiced properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned so much with foraging for plants and mushrooms that whenever something like dandelion, for example, when it's there, it's a gift. It's a gift from the earth saying, "Hey, I'm here for you. I'm growing here because it's needed here." Right? It's something I learned in wild plant foraging.
Right, and dandelions, for example, you call them weeds, and yet they're so vital. Right? They're so green and they're so fresh. They have that bitter quality that's like really good for healing the liver, for people who get overheated, for cleansing the blood and those sorts of things. And so it's just really interesting. There's an old Ayurvedic story where the teacher sent everybody out into the world and asked them to bring back something that had no medicinal value.
Okay.
And they all went out, and one guy came back with some broken glass.
Oh,
And the teacher showed them how to, I don't know, he ground up the glass and made a decoction and said, this is actually good for this, that, and the other thing. And
wow.
somebody else brought back this kind of moldy stick, and he, did another thing. And everybody brought back something weird, and the doctor was like, well, actually, like, for this specific thing, this will work.
So cool.
Prepared in this way. It's like, so, and there are things like, just rocks, it's like, well, if we, this rock works with this astrological condition. It's not that you're necessarily going to eat it, but it still balances something out. And then, of course, the one person that came back crying, feeling like they failed, and they said, I couldn't find anything. Everything I found had some medicinal value.
Aww.
And he won. He got student of the
day. Right on. Oh, cool.
I had another question for you, and then maybe we'll need to go to some comments from some of our viewers.
Okay.
They're hanging out here. But I had one more question for you, and that was on balance. Certainly your talk is focused an awful lot on balance.
Yes.
And we've mentioned, well, as you've mentioned, eating local in season, certainly making sure to incorporate mushrooms into your diet as well is all very important. But if balance is very important, can we also kind of go a little bit too far in the other direction, that we're kind of like over investing in some of these ideas is maybe a little bit too much of a push on a health? Like, where's the healthy balance that this can go from being like a little bit of an obsession and maybe a little bit too far to be unhealthy in the other direction?
Right.
Like, when is enough and when is too much too much? Good question.
Well, that depends on the individual, of course, right? So I was talking to somebody recently about them going into grocery stores and having anxiety attacks about whether the food was healthy enough and if it was packaged in enough plastic and things of that nature, right? And so it's like, that is vata aggravating, right? It's like being worried or anxious about what you're eating all the time. There's something, if you Google it, it's called orthorexia, and it's an obsession with food purity. And it's what ends up happening is somebody is pure and they're pure and they kind of don't eat, or they only eat organic, and they're very strict about this. And then what happens is at some point they crack and they eat like Dunkin' Donuts, and then they punish themselves and double down on like the fasting and the restrictions and things like that. And it's called orthorexia. It's a thing. And so you want to watch out for that kind of thing. There's nothing to eat or not eat that is worth upsetting yourself about.
Sure.
Right? You want to, like, if you look at like the Yoga Sutras, for example, there's the word asana, which is what we take to mean yoga pose. And the way it's defined is to have a firm yet comfortable relationship to the earth. And on one level, they're talking about your butt's relationship to the ground. But on another level, they're talking about things like food. Like, is our relationship with food comfortable? Right? I was like, I'm not telling you this stuff to get people all tweaked out on like they have to do this or they have to do that. If anything, I want you to find a system that works for you so that you can relax about things. Right? Yes. So that you're like, oh, like I eat warm food when it's cold out. Sure. I eat cooling foods. I eat more cucumbers when it's hot. And it's like that. Then we can take solace in that. It's almost like, how do we create a system around our nutrition that is a refuge?
Yes, we need.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Because I just know that sometimes this can be a little bit stress-inducing, as you were saying. If we recognize that we want to be sure that we're eating as local and as healthy as possible, some of that guilt, like you were saying, if we're eating something that's imported or maybe isn't as healthy, and recognizing it's not as healthy. But I really appreciate your answer.
Yeah. And of course, it's like dietary restrictions are a privilege. You know what I mean?
Right. I get
to
that.
like have the ability to not just have to eat whatever's in front of you is hopefully gratitude producing.
Right.
I'm not trying to induce stress. I want to induce gratitude.
Yes. I'm coming from here in Baltimore, where I actually live in a food desert. Like, the nearest grocery store is not walkable. And I luckily have a car, so I can drive to the mom's organic market. But none of my neighbors have that same access to the whole quality food that is really concerning. You want to make sure you get enough of. So we have a few more minutes before we gotta say goodbye to Daniel, and I just can't get enough of you. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here.
For sure. Does Outdoor Mittens have a question? I want a question from Outdoor Mittens.
Outdoor Mittens. Oh yeah, no, they just made a comment says that the fly may be telling you something useful, important. Yes, I just recently learned. So I've been really observing lately. I used to swat at the flies and maybe try and enter them, but now I've started to shoo them away because what I realized as I've been working a lot in my garden this year, I'm seeing the flies hop from plant to plant. I'm like, oh, you're a pollinator too. All right, fly. I see you over there. I guess I'll let you live. So yeah, I have learned recently. A fly has taught me that they have some value.
Right. So can I just tell people where to find me if they want?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I mostly do coaching. I'm a coach, and I do a lot of mindfulness, meditation, things of that nature, and no small amount of psychedelic integration coaching. So I work with people who are preparing for that. Yeah. So there's my email, and if you go to my website, tamintegration.com/MCAF, I have a little email course that I've created on meditative preparation for psychedelic journeys.
I'm signing up.
And yeah, it's just you get a little 5-minute email from me every day walking around my neighborhood telling you how to cultivate gratitude is one of the lessons.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I'd love for you to enjoy that for, it'll be up for the foreseeable future.
Oh, and also just a shout out to Daniel. You see this scrolling website just above us, MuslimCityArtFestival.org. We have our gratitude to Daniel for that. So again, thanks for participating. Thanks for your support over the years. So good to see you.
Right. Well, the thing is I used to live on the West Coast, and I was never really able, it never worked out for me to be able to come to Mushroom City.
Right? And now we're virtual.
And now you're virtual, and I can be here.
Yes.
And it's really, really nice after watching it just like grow and blossom. And again, just shout out to Robin for all of the things that she has done over an extraordinary long period of time. When we see all of these conferences popping up left and right, Robin's been at this for 8 years. Yep. Just like it doesn't get more grassroots. It doesn't get more committed to the culture than Robin.
Yeah, it's been a blessing. I've been glad to meet her and be a part of the process. She's actually out getting to enjoy nature today. She's at the park today, right now.
That's where I'm headed. I got to go play Frisbee.
Oh, awesome. All right, Daniel, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
All right. Be well, guys.
Thank you.
Many blessings.